Hello, everyone. This is Chilton, your TA, and today we're going to talk about Veiled Sentiments, the book by Laila Abu Lagod. And what we're going to do with this screen recording is I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the concepts that we've encountered so far in the book, and then um, we will have a question that's embedded in this presentation. And so what I want you to do is just watch this entire presentation and then answer the question and then shoot me an email answering that question. And when you do that, um, I will count that as your attendance grade and your participation points for the week. So the point of today's lecture is to... Oh, yeah. Okay, so the point of today's lecture is to kind of understand how the Bedouin people that Laila Abu Lagod lived with, how they kind of make sense of life and how they organize their social structure. And what we're going to learn today is that both blood and poetry are key to the social organization of this society. And so this is a poem, the first sort of short poem that Laila Abu Lagod writes about in her ethnography, and it says, "A fog of despair shrouds the eye, just as it starts to clear." And she kind of shares the story of, how this poem was central to her learning about the importance of poetry, or I shouldn't say central to it, but was kind of like one of the initial times that she started to understand that poetry is saying something very meaningful in the social life of these people. And so the context in which she heard this poem was that it was recited by a woman at a ceremony of reconciliation. And then, so she was at this ceremony, and it was the reconciliation was happening by two different clans within the tribe, trying to mourn the loss of a shared relative. And by the mourning of that loss of the shared relative, they were trying to kind of reconcile their two tribes, bring their two tribes back together, or their two clans back together. And so the woman told her this poem, and she didn't really think much of it. But then she later described the ceremony and the poem to other women in the group who weren't there. And the women recognized the woman based on Laila Abu Lugod's description, but also based on the poem itself. And so Laila Abu Lagod was trying to figure out, well, like, what does this poem mean? It's just two lines, but she seemed to say it with a lot of gravitas. And the other women tell her that they tell her what the poem meant, but not by describing what the words mean, but by conveying the meaning of the poem through what had happened to the woman. And so what she finds out is that her son was shot and killed by Egyptian soldiers 2 years ago. And so, Laila Abu Lagod later puts it all together and realizes that the poem was an expression of the woman's sadness, and it was triggered by the somberness of the reconciliation ceremony. So the poems that I want to focus on today are the ones that are told by women, and these are called Genawas, I think is how you say it. And these Genawas literally mean little songs, and they're recited by women, and they're sort of the skeleton key to understanding something deeply human about women in Bedouin society. And so, what is that, or why are poems so important to this society? That has to do with the society being centered around notions of honor and modesty. These are like the two key things by which you kind of constitute yourself as an individual in this society. And these are like the two highest values. And honor and modesty kind of, well, they relate directly to blood, which I'll get into later in this presentation. And so this idea of honor and modesty kind of come together in the gendered role of women in this society. And they're not supposed to overtly express their sentiments. So you're not supposed to go around describing how you feel in a public way. At the same time, the society also really values individuality and autonomy. And so, individuality and autonomy should allow you, uh, theoretically, to express how you're feeling in a public way, and yet all of that is sort of oppressed in society. And so, what Laila Abu Lago talks about is that these Genawas, these poems, are kind of like the way of women that women have developed to express their individuality and their autonomy in a society where they're really not supposed to do that because of honor and modesty codes. So the poems are kind of like this crack through which these other values in society, individuality and autonomy, are allowed to be expressed. And so that's kind of like the key to understanding a lot of what's going on and why these poems are so important. And building from that basic fact, she's going to go into a lot more detail throughout the book about like the importance of these poems. So these ideas of honor and modesty and this kind of strict moral code is really important, and it kind of runs through blood and the Bedouins' conceptions of blood. And so Laila Abu Lugo describes how the Bedouins do not define themselves by their way of life, even though they are nomads. Like, I think outside of Bedouin society, people would describe Bedouins as like nomadic people, and that's kind of defining them. But she describes how for the Bedouins themselves, that's not really how they like constitute themselves as a society or describe their way of life. And nor do they define themselves so much as people who live in a particular place. Rather, they define themselves on the basis of principles of social organization according to this ethnography. And so, what are those core principles? The first one is genealogy, and basically that your tribal order is based on your relationships. That's what genealogy means: is your relationships, your family tree. And the way they reckon those family trees is through the closeness of a term called agnates. And agnates basically mean your paternal relatives, so everyone that you're related to on your father's side. And then the second big principle is that tribal order is tied to a code of morality. Again, this code of morality really turns on honor and modesty, but also kind of this sort of like subtext of individuality and independence. And so Laila Abu Lughod writes that these principles are gathered up in Aulad Ali notions of blood, a multifaceted concept with dense meanings and tremendous cultural force. And I don't remember if I said this earlier in the presentation, but Aulad Ali are the particular Bedouin people that we're talking about today. So why does blood matter? Blood is the authenticator of origin or pedigree, and as such it differentiates Aulad Ali in their own minds from Egyptians and really from other people in the world. So no matter where you live, if you can trace your bloodline to a member of Aulad Ali, of the Aulad Ali tribe, then you are considered like an Arab, a member of the tribe, and not an Egyptian. So a person's nature or their worth is closely tied to the worthiness of his or her bloodline or stock. This is the idea of pedigree, like how you can trace your blood back in time to your other relations. And it's also kind of described as the nobility of your origins. This is how you achieve status in this society. And so nobility of origins confers moral qualities of a person's character. In other words, that means like your character is directly connected to your blood, and your blood really in the way in the worldviews of the Aulad Ali people, your character, your blood like carries your character. So the most highly valued characteristics in this society include your sincerity, your honesty, your excellence, your honor, your modesty. And so this has implications and kind of like social implications between men and women. And so to show outward affection to your husband and wife is a sign of weakness. So For men to do things for your wife is to be unmanly, even if you love her, and for women to admit to having sex with your husband is a display of immodesty. And so again, this is like kind of getting to the title of the book, where you might have these sentiments, you might have these feelings and emotions, but they have to be veiled. They have to be sort of subdued. So that's why it's called veiled sentiments. So your blood it kind of runs through your family ties, but it's also a social relationship. And she talks about how blood establishes hierarchy, but also links between people. So all those related by blood share a substance that identifies them in terms of social identity. So in this society, substance is really, or blood is the important substance, whereas in the Karsten readings and discussions we had, if you remember, the salient substances were like breast milk and then the substances of food. So your descent, inheritance, and tribal socio-political organization in this worldview, they're all patrilineal, meaning they flow through your father's side of your relationships. And the strongest relationships are those between father and son, but then there's also really strong relationships between fathers and daughters. And just to kind of underscore how the matrilineal side is not that important, like in a case of divorce, the mother has no right to keep children. And women retain a tribal affiliation and are expected to side with their own kin, so their father's side, in disputes with their husband's kin. And finally, a woman remains dependent on moral, legal, and economic support of her father, brothers, or other kinsmen. So, in the U.S., like if you get married, oftentimes like your allegiance kind of shifts or becomes aligned with your own household. So if you had a dispute with, say, your dad's cousins, and the dispute was between your household and your dad's cousins, in US society, I think probably most people would side with their own household, but in this society, you're supposed to side with like your dad's kinsmen. And it's kind of an important concept that underscores the importance of patrilineality in this society. And the fact that like the woman remains dependent on like the support of her fathers, her brothers, and her other kinsmen that are male is gathered up in this statement that behind me are men. And she elaborates that on page 54. So just to tie it all together, there's this kind of synergy that's going on, this social synergy that's going on in this society between concepts of blood, morality, honor, and modesty. So morality distinguishes Aulad Ali in their own minds from other people in the world. Individuals achieve social status by living up to this code of honor. For women, this means modesty, no outward display of emotions. At the same time, however, and this is where the tension comes in, there's also this need for autonomy, which she describes as equality of freedom from domination by others. And so this tension is that, on the one hand, you have this equality and independence, which your honor depends on, and yet you're really not supposed to outwardly display your own feelings and stuff. So that's the wrap on what I wanted to say for veiled sentiments today. And here's the question that I wanted you all to answer. So what is the role of poetry in Aulad Ali's society, especially Genawas? What important codes of conduct does poetry reconcile, and how does it do so? So if you'll go ahead and answer those questions, and it doesn't need to be anything long, just a couple sentences, and email that to me, then that will get you your participation grade and your attendance grade. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for sitting through this presentation, and I hope you have a great weekend.